Ladies and gentlemen, we are back. It's been a while, I know, but like Jay Z said, let me reintroduce myself. On this show, we value rigorous discourse and the pursuit of truth in all realms of human endeavor and our natural environment, seen and unseen. Learning should never cease, and where we find ourselves with thoughts which are unfounded, we seek to upgrade them with facts and sound reasoning. But here, this show y'all watching, just remember your opinion don't count.
Facts.
So, my question here is gender roles. First off, gender. Is it biology or is it a social construct?
Starting heavy.
Big and bold.
Well, obviously we could take the straight and narrow road to that. Um, we all know what a male is biologically and a female is biologically. And it all comes down to chromosomes, it's biological. But on the other side of that now, today we have so many different genders. And it seems to be growing every day continuously, which is for me not really a problem, but it's a big but. When you force feed the entire populace that, hey, you have to accept this, that's when it becomes a problem. We are no longer ourselves when we continue to move with the crowd. And that's the biggest issue. So society today is making it very hard for facts to remain supreme. Opinions outweigh facts in a lot of eyes today, and that's becoming problematic.
Okay, so what would you say to the ones out there say you just said chromosomes, right? You got the XX,
Hmm?
the XY. So what do you call somebody that's a XXY?
Well, we love to find a biological term for that, but at the same time, that doesn't give you the right to say, well, because I have X, X, Y, Z, B, R, A, whatever it is, even if
Mm-hmm.
it's new chromosomes that's introduced because scientists continuously find stuff. Even if that's the case, you still, to me, in my opinion, don't have the right to say you should call me this, that, he, she, him, whatever you choose to be. In my eyes, if you're a female, and I know a lot of women nowadays hate for men to refer to them as females. In my eyes, are you a female then? Woman and female are the same, and that's what I'm going to refer to you as.
Okay. So in your eyes, it's biology. Gender is
All the way
biologically based. And you?
factual.
And you, Wayne?
For me, I really think that when it boils down to the conversation around this topic, and even when we look at science, the whole idea of what happens in science, when things are categorized, we have to look at everything is always on some sort of spectrum. Now, when we start to have conversations, we want to be able to distinguish between a kitten and a lion. We differentiate to say that this is a house cat and this is a lion. Somewhere along the lines, clearly you could see that they are similar type animals, they're feline, they are whatever they are, but we still make the distinction to say house cat lion. All of that happens within the confines of science and idea around the degrees, not necessarily like degrees of separation, but degrees of distinction when you start to determine how different does a thing have to be in order to be in a different category. And I think that when you look at it from that perspective, you realize that if confusion was your if that was your goal, you could realistically turn everything in the world into nonsense. So in order to communicate as human beings, we have to that's the way that the human brain works. We have to categorize things because there's so massive information that is everywhere. In order to communicate coherently to each other, we group things and we put them in different categories. So that's the primary thing for me when it comes to this conversation is understanding it's not so much that okay, it's not valid that you're saying this is different, that, but what is the point? Because if we wanted to make a point of saying every little thing is a different thing, then everything in the universe is different. We wouldn't have names for anything. We wouldn't be able to call a mammal, a reptile, a we wouldn't be able to do it if we just tried to treat everything as if we look for the distinction in everything.
Okay, so
go ahead.
So with that said, then it would just be fair. What they're calling gender today as a social construct, would it then just be fair? Because as you said, it's all on a spectrum. What that spectrum could be infinite, because no two people are the same. So you could have two very masculine men or masculine males that they can differ ever so slightly. Like you look at them and they, big, muscular, beards, whatever it is you define masculinity as, but one could just be slightly more feminine than the next, but you still view them as masculine. So would it just be fair to just say all of that we are now calling social construct, you could just call it individuality?
Right. And I think that would then place that in a category where, okay, we don't really have to discuss individuality in the context of how it brings everything together, because we acknowledging that it's individual.
Right.
So to your point, if you start now, they want to say, people say, oh, cis male. And then, well, so now then you're gonna have a sub cis male and you're gonna have a sub beta cis male, and then so these, because it's infinite, as to the point, if you make up your mind that you want to start to parse things off, you could do that forever.
Mm-hmm.
And so it goes to the point where it doesn't make any sense. So it has, for me, it has to boil back around to the question of what is the objective? What are you actually seeking to accomplish by communicating this context of this group? You need a group for a reason, not just to say that it exists, because everything exists.
Okay. So for
I
the
think.
sake of,
Go ahead.
I just want to clarify that for the sake of this conversation, we now defining gender as biological? Because as you said, Rain, we need to classify things for a purpose. And if we just have infinite classifications, then it essentially becomes no purpose. So we now classify it as male and female, and we use a biological basis for it, so that we know, hey, we know XX chromosomes have a vagina, XY chromosomes have a penis. Like, generally speaking, as long as there's no abnormalities, we know that that's what that have. So we use that as a classification.
That's the way that I see the world.
Bingo.
I agree with that 100%. And back to what Wayne was saying, I think the goal for a lot of them is to inspire change and to be leaders in that change, which is not crime, it's not horrible, but at the same time, you have to realize that force feeding people is not the way to go about changing them or changing their perspectives on life. And that is the biggest problem for me, in my opinion, with movements that want to force feed you continuously. Well, you have to do this, well, you have to do that, or else it's becoming discriminatory, or it's now a hate crime. If you want to be called whatever pronouns you choose, that is fine. If someone is in agreement with you and they're going to say, you know what, I'm gonna address you by your pronouns, that is fine. But if someone that opposes to that, let them be. What's the problem? Why is it now becoming an issue? Why is it now becoming a social issue? And that's my biggest thing with that. If you whatever you are is fine. I'm not going to be against anybody. But the force feeding is the biggest problem with
that. Okay, so now that we get that biology is, for our conversation, the basis of gender, do you think that each gender generally has gender roles, and should they have gender roles?
I would say yes and no. So obviously men and women have different nature. Women tend to be a bit more positive than men. Men tend to be a bit forward, which is a strength for a lot of women as well because they have patience, they have that nurturing side of them. They could be more tactical, they could be more verbal, they could be kinder. They're usually more home oriented. So it's traits like that. I think that a lot of females or most females need, and they should stick to certain roles within the gender stereotypes. And I hate to use the word stereotypes because women, that's naturally there for. It's gonna get a lot of hate, but I think that we should sit within our responsibilities as men and females. Obviously, women are here to give birth, to raise children, to teach, to educate. Men are go-getters, they are providers, they are independent, they are active, they are worldly, they're decisive. They tend to move on logic, and women tend to move on emotion. That's also gonna get a lot of hate, but it is what it is. And I feel like even introducing gender roles is what's causing a lot of problems because men and women create amazing teams together, right? Obviously, you're gonna have different traits, and that's what makes a great team. So now saying that I want to be exactly like what most feminists say a man, that's going to create a lot of headache in terms of relationships, in terms of marriage, in terms of work, in terms of public views as well, right? Women and men, once again, make amazing teams once they fit in their roles. Everybody has a role and a part to play. And I feel like the way the world is going now with the ultimate feminism, feminists, it's going to create issues where relationships won't last, marriages statistically now are falling apart. I just feel like we should stick in our agenda.
Yeah, I think you hitting the nail on the head there as it relates to the idea when we talk about where was this all coming from or what's the point and all of this. I think when you start to talk about gender roles, I think to some that's really what rubs individuals the wrong way because particularly with the wave of feminism on the move and which has been for 40, 50 years at this point. um when you start to now say, like you said, Kev, men are typically the assertive one. Oh, all of a sudden, that's an immediate reaction. Oh, I'm very assertive on the job. I'm very, so there are things where I think that we're having a trouble handling the nuance of the male female dynamic in a way where it's hard to, in any conversation, I would always be having with someone and I may say something like, okay, typically men are this. Oh, well, that's not all men. Well, of course, if we're gonna have a sensible discourse, nobody can ever speak for every person on earth. No, nothing can speak to that. So to me, it doesn't even make sense to say, things like, well, if I say Bahamians like peas and rice, oh, everybody don't like peas and rice. Well, of course, but the majority do. That's the way that we communicate when we say those things. And I think that the challenge is starting to come where when in the wave of feminism, you start to get this mindset of, well, we are equal to you and equal to you and equal in value, which is what the idea sounds like it wanted to be, then turn to equal as in the same. And then you get this conversation around, oh, anything a man could do, a woman could do. And then it's where, okay, well, if that is the case, then why are you trying to tell me that I run on emotions and not logic? Because I am very logical. And that's where certain aspects of, I had this thought the other day about the delusion that we're saying and we're acknowledging within, females in our community and growing among women, right? We always talk, oh, the delusion. In actuality, delusion in women is a gift because when your mother looks at you and tells you, you could be anything you want to be. You could be the president of the United States. You could be the prime minister of the Bahamas. You could go to the NBA. You could be a world-renowned brain surgeon. There is pretty much no reason why you're making that assessment. Half the time, clearly, the child is average because that's what average is. And they're going to have an average life with average results. But moms don't see that. Moms give you the big dream, the big vision, and they tell you could do this and do that. And it's the same way with women, historically in relationships. Oh, baby, you could do it. I know this. And because they're supposed to inspire you in to move beyond, because you need that push. So that delusion, when it's harnessed properly, is actually a good thing, because men are not delusional, and men would logically just reach the predestined outcome, and they may never go higher if it is not for the inspiration and the imagination of a woman. We may sit down and say, all right, well, you as an engineer or you as a finance man, okay, this is what we could do then. And we could do these three things, and these are the three things what we could do. Let's go ahead and do it. But it really may take a woman to come in and put in the mix and sprinkle something that we're not thinking of. And that's the part that I think is missing, is that, yeah, that magic pixie dust, that's supposed to be used in a concoction, but you can't have magic pixie dust setting the course for the world. You can't have magic pixie dust setting the course for every interaction, because then you just running around delusional.
Right. Which is why I said earlier, men and women make great partners, right? We don't even have to go as far as your mother, your girlfriend, and your wife. They would gas you up, right?
Right.
Sometimes that is needed. Sometimes you might just need that extra push, right? Because me personally, if I know I'm not in my means to accomplish something at this moment, I'm gonna look down the line, see where it can be done, and when I can fit that in there to get that goal.
Right.
But your females in your life be like, hey, this could happen now. We can make this happen by doing this, just hyping you up, right? Which I feel is needed. And as a man, I'll tell you directly that sometimes I need it. But sometimes so zoned in and so focused on one thing and trying to get to A instead of going to B right now. My lady could come in and say, hey, I know you're trying to get to B, but A is also possible. Just that hype, that encouragement, that goes a long way.
Right.
And a lot of females now, they trying to be Miss Independent, which is fine, obviously. But at the same time, it's going to create a lot of friction between you and your partner. You're both headstrong and independent. Who's gassing who up? Are you trying to beat me on and my goals, or am I trying to outdo you? And that competition can be healthy, but also can be very, very, very toxic. And I feel like a lot of females today don't really understand that.
Yeah.
They want to be the different dominant ones, right?
Yeah, definitely. And looping it back into the way how it started, the topic, I think that point there, if the world worked where men and women were these kind of like completely asexual, biology didn't matter, you could have that free flexibility of, okay, well, a woman gonna do whatever she want to do, and she gonna just find a man who do the other thing, and then it go together, and it's a team that way. Or the man go this way and the woman go this way, and we could just make it work. That seems to be the way that, not to say women are actually thinking like that, but that's the way that it's setting up as to what is actually happening. The problem is you're encountering natural biology, and then that natural biology is making it so that the majority of men act a certain way. And so, yes, you may find one or two people who mesh into, you're a dominating woman and you want to lead, and you may find a man who fits in, but it's not a natural kind of movement. And so you don't have that flexibility where it just goes yin and yang at any level. It seems as though that is out of sorts. It's creating something that is out of sorts, and there is no match for it. And that's where I think that the whole issue comes up then of, you're forcing the gender roles because you're saying I can't be like this and I can't. So why is this role reserved for a man? And that's where I think a lot of the fight of the gender issue is coming about, is because there is no natural match for this thing that you could put it simply and say that this thing that feminism has created, there's no natural match for it.
Okay. So if we in a perfect world, actually no, even in this world we live in right now, do you think that there are gender roles that should be taught, or are there any that bear us shying away from?
I think
That's a
I think
double-edged sword.
that I do. Go ahead, Kev.
That's definitely a double-edged sword because, for example, most men tend to be more analytical than females, but females tend to be more verbal, right? That's a gift and a curse on both ends.
Mhm.
Now, Wayne, as a finance guy, I'm pretty sure you heard this term before, analysis paralysis. A lot of men would sit there and analyze and not move forward. But a female could sit there and verbalize and literally speak what she wants into existence. And to sit here and say, well, certain things should be taught, they should be taught, obviously. But a lot of those things comes natural. A lot of those things come natural. And I'll take it a step even further. I feel like some gender stereotypes from women should be taught to men and vice versa. Because men can learn a lot from women and women can learn a lot from men.
Right.
Definitely.
And if you're the type of person that's not in a partnership, as a man, I could tell you definitely that there's a lot of things that you could learn from a female that would definitely help you in your life, regardless of what you believe in. It's kind of like the Bible. You might not believe in God, but the Bible is a great book to learn from. Just like a female in my eyes. There's a lot of things that I took from my sister, my mother, my girlfriend, and I just implemented that into my life. And people will be like, "Oh, well, that's a bit feminist," but at the same time, listen, I'm trying to progress and I'm trying to find the best way forward. So you could sit there and you could say you have a partner and she, fulfill her roles, but at the same time, you could learn from her. She doesn't always need to be around for her to be in your ear. You could take those same gender role stereotypes and you could implement it in your life and make your life so much easier. And vice versa. Women could do it too. Women would move off of emotion. I could guarantee you, if the average woman just sat there and thought about whatever they're gonna do and whatever they have planned, logically, they would be a lot better off. And that's what relationships work. That's what friendships. That's what just being social. So
Mhm.
I feel like it's a give and a take. I feel both parties could learn from one another.
Yeah.
Agreed. I guess my question more stems of that we have some stereotypes that are negative. We have some stereotypes that are positive, right? And I'm wondering whether or not there are any of those stereotypes that we definitely should say, hey, continue to enforce them, like
Mhm.
uh, making it a conscious decision to enforce it, just as well as are there any particular stereotypes that we should make a conscious decision to move away from, like, and try and with the next generation try to push them away from that kind of stereotype, even if they're falling into it.
Yeah, you alluding to something that's powerful, Dito. And every now and again, when we get into these chats, I'm a weekend historian, so some of these things will come into play because I always tell people, particularly when it comes from knowledge and I speak within the diaspora, and so a lot of my history and context is stems from African traditional constructs, right? And a part of what is alluded to when you're saying what you're saying is rites of passage. And rites of passage is something that has been established within the African cultural context, and other communities have them as well, because these were things that were adopted as civilization grew. But there was definitely a point in time where you would have a series of events that are taking place where boys would transition into men, girls would transition into women. There were set times, and this is something that's important for us as a human species, one of the defining characteristics, one of the most powerful defining characteristics of the human species is our ability to pass on learned experiences to our offspring for intergenerational learning. That's something that is a differentiator in the animal kingdom, not something that just comes about through an evolution or natural reactions and responses. This is actually us having information, and because of the way that we adapt information, we're able to pass that on. So I always tell people, if we find ourselves every generation, oh well, you got to go through it, or we need to experience this for ourselves, or we losing if that is the case, because that's not how human civilization was developed. Human civilization was developed just in the sense of what you're alluding to, is that each generation stands on top of a generation. And so when we bring this back to the context of the sexes and genders, yes, there should be things that we say boys and men need to do this, women and girls need to do this, even at a base level. So when you start simply saying things like, in this day and time, let's say we're talking about something like fixing a car tire, or changing a pipe as far as plumbing or something like that. These, not everyone's gonna know how to do these things, but what I'm talking about is along the curve of you growing into a man, there should be things that you know how to do. Things like reading a map. I go through this with my nephew. He was on a trip with, I think it was all other women. He was the only boy. And I call him, they were at a gas station rest stop. They were driving somewhere from in North Florida, like the Pensacola area. They were driving to Miami. And when I asked him, I said, where you all at? Oh, uncle, I don't really know, I in the back. And I was like, hold on, guy. You're the only man on that trip. I said to him, you should know how much miles per gallon the vehicles you all are driving in, how much miles per gallon do they go? You should know how much miles the trip is that you were on. You should know the highway that you are on at all times. You should have a small weapon in the car, whether it's a knife, whether it's a bottle. I say you should have something, even if you need to create a diversion. You have to have something, and you have to know where it is that you are. So whether it's you looking on the GPS, whether it's you looking on your phone, or whether it's you following a map, as a man, you need to know those things. I don't care if the aunts are adults and your mom is there, and that stuff is irrelevant. And he was, 16, 17 years old at the time, and he is with women, they 50 and 40 and all of this. But my thing to him is that I don't care what they know and what they're doing, because they are all women. You need to know that as a man.
I could agree with that 100%. As a person that recently took a trip with all females, I agree with you 100%. Because we all have different ways of thinking, right? Men, well, most men, I'm not gonna say all men. Most men have a heightened sense of awareness. Most females don't. They hop in their car, they drive, la da. They only worry about where they're going and what time they're gonna be there. They're not checking surroundings. They're not checking best routes. They're not checking nearest gas station. Not constantly looking at the gauge to see if anything is going wrong. Most females just hop in the vehicle and never even check to see if there's a check engine light.
Right.
So I agree with you 100%. There are things that men should know, and definitely things that women should know. And the problem with that is that, like you said, a lot of men now, they don't have correct upbringing, or they raised in a single parent home, more likely a female with their mother. So not taught certain things, right? But it's up to you to go there and learn that. And it's the same thing with females. Regardless if you grow up in a household with just your mother, even though you're a young lady, there are things that your father can also teach you, your mother's not, right? Those are things that are passed down. I agree with you 100%. Now, you learning things from the other side doesn't hurt, but there are things definitely a woman should know and a man should know. I agree with that 100%.
So is that a things men should know or things women should know? Is that something that is strictly across the board, the human race? Is that based on geographical location? Is that based on culture? Or is there a small set of gender roles that each sex should fulfill?
Yeah, for sure. Well, women were put here to give life, to bring forth life. I feel like they should know how to nurture, they should know how to have patience, they should know how to educate. Those are three things I feel like a woman should know how to do. Now, we could all get into the argument of women should know how to cook and clean and be submissive. That takes a box seat to you being a parent, to you knowing how to nurture, you having patience, you knowing how to educate. Everything else takes a box seat because once a child is involved, nothing else really matters. You need to pass on the information that you have to the next generation, like we said. So
Mhm.
I, well, yeah, women should know those three things in my book. Now,
I
men,
think even within that, though, Kev, part of
mhm,
the conversation comes where you will have, where there's feminists or where there's women or where there's even some men who would then start to talk about, well, what are you trying to then define a woman's purpose as just saying having children? And so that conversation tries to get steered away from, well, if you only define this by having children, everyone doesn't have children. And even the ones who want children, this is something that is kind of, I guess, growing this idea like the kids are they are they are different, they are separate, and it's still my life. Like I even when you talk about the context of staying together for the kids, and every once in a while I will always send a shout out on social media to the real MVPs is the people who stay together just for the kids, because for me that rises above this idea of, oh, I'm not happy, or oh, I'm not, it's because there's purpose above that. But when you get this conversation is all related to the individuality, personal happiness, personal freedom, personal expression. It then creates this thing where even for children, you have women developing a mindset that the children and men as well, you have both genders developing this thing where it's like, yeah, I have kids and they my kids, but this is my life. It's not this sense of, okay, this is a family and this is a growing family. And, we are connected to our, mothers, grandmothers, and we will be connected to our offspring. It's not that sense. It's really this thing about the individual and YOLO. And, so it's like, well, I can spend this money because the children, they only can do this and that. So I can spend all the money. Well, that's not how we deal intergenerationally. That's not how we communicate. People who have the mindset to build generations, to build societies, they don't have that mindset.
Okay. So
I agree.
so Kev, you were just saying like women, obviously women are designed in order for them to give birth, but you were saying nurturing and raising and things like that. So what then do you say? So from this book by Jean Hamilton, the book is called Comparison of Parenting and Children's Be no, it's not a book, sorry. It's from the Journal of Divorce and Remarriage. And the article is Comparison of Parenting and Children's Behavior in Single Mother, Single Father, and Intact Families. Right. And there's a quote from it. It says, and the question was, do children do better with single mothers or single fathers? Says, however, when single mothers and single fathers were compared, several differences in positive parenting behaviors emerged. Single fathers were found to be more confident of their parenting ability and to feel they had a better parent-child relationship than did single mothers. And there are statistics that come out to show that children children do better in dual parent household, and then it's single father households and a single mother households. So how does that compare that even though a woman is designed to raise and nurture, children tend to become, I guess the word would be better products of
Better
society.
adapted when you're
Just
talking about.
right, like to become better adults, effective adults in society.
Well, okay. Well, firstly, touching on nurturing again. Now, obviously, nurturing comes in different forms. Like Wayne said earlier, that women tend to be more delusional. They would say, "Hey, you can do whatever you want." They would give you hope, right? They would give you hope, belief, ambition, right? That's a form of nurturing.
Hmm.
Even if you look at the average female today, they take care of themselves. They pride in taking care of themselves. That's also a form of nurturing, correct? So back to your point now. Obviously, it takes a community to raise a child, right? So you can have a single parent, but they're still going to be influenced by things outside of the household, both positive and negative. Now, for them having certain traits from a father in terms of confidence, like you said, a father's more confident in their ability to raise a child. I feel like, man, it comes in the form of being cocky, right? Because you could sit there and say, I'm a man, I could do this. But there's certain things that I feel like men struggle to give their children, that it comes naturally to a woman, and vice versa. Men tend to be more stern, women tend to be, obviously, they move on emotions, they tend to be softer on their kids. So they would learn how to be stern from situations to people outside of the household.
Okay.
Mhm.
So I feel obviously that's obviously a give and take, but I feel in most cases women do better with raising kids on their own.
And I'll key in on that, right, Dito?
Hmm.
Because I think part of what's happening right now, because you're actually presented statistics that are measured against certain parameters, and Kev is alluding to a natural kind of feeling,
Hmm.
and here is where I guess the rubber hits the road when it comes down to how we measure in success. And this is the reason why, the dual parent household is ideal, because you do get, and to reference to how the show intros, you get the seen and the unseen out of the male and the female. See, when you're most likely, the statistics that you're referring to, they have to have hard metrics just by the nature of being measured. So if we're going to talk about things like, I've seen certain things along, I'm not sure if it's the same study, but you talk about respectful treatment of authority, or whether it's being arrested.
Hmm.
You talk about their what they end up earning, their level of school completion, and different things like that, which they are getting better outcomes when they have a single father versus a single mother
Hmm.
by the percentage, because of course it's grossly overmatched with single mothers.
Right.
But you will see those things, because typically what a male brings to the table is the structure.
Hmm.
So you're going to have a base level of performance when you are given the structure. And so if you start to measure and say, okay, well, are these adaptable human adults, and, can they hold a job properly? And you will start to get the majority of those people that have gotten pure structure, they will perform well. But now, if you start to look behind the curtains and you look at love and affection, and you look at, emotional intelligence, and you look at these different factors, now you may start to see different things. And this is where the natural cohesion of the male and the female come in to create that balance.
Hmm.
So I think that alludes to it. But of course, if you, at the end of the day, if you're looking from a societal standpoint, and you say, well, what do I rather? Someone that knows themselves and they love themselves, but they also commit crimes with regularity, or someone that doesn't commit a crime but doesn't fully know how to love someone else. Obviously there's a preference towards the person that's going to be a law-abiding citizen.
So agreed. So to put like what both of you are saying together, like Kev saying with the like women, they give that delusion, and you have that men give that structure. So as before, it's if we have basically it's if we have a young man or young woman raised by a father, they can become a productive member of society, but just basically following the status quo. But whereas if you have a single mother, she's feeding that delusion you can be whatever you want to be. But without the father there, there's no structure to achieve that be whatever you want to be. But with just
Right.
the structure, there's no delusion to have the grandeur of anything you want to achieve.
Right, right. Which is part of what we see manifested in society. And that's why I always tell people, for me, it's not a ideas race and an ideas war, because at some point you have to look at the outcomes. And so, there was a young lady I was talking to today, and we were talking relative to career cost or whatever. And of course, I won't go too much detail, but um she said she's still going to be a doctor. This is what she said. Now, when I got to look at her information, right? She had, well, first of all, she is, what should be 34, 35, depending on where the year, what her birthday. She's 34, 35. She does not have any degree, right? She just finished high school and what's not. And just off of memory, I think three of her uh, BGCSEs, her examinations, they were D's, and she actually put them down. So there was 2 C's and 3 D's, and whatever they were. She has had a job as a security guard, as a clerk, and a cashier. But she's steadily looking me in my face and saying, but I'm still going to be a doctor. And see, this is the thing for me where the delusion, it has to come to meet the road somewhere when we start to talk about how do we then start to manifest the outcomes that we're actually going to be working with in real life. Because it matters at some point. Yes, you could have a dream as a 12-year-old, as a 9-year-old, that you're going to do whatever you want to do. But at some point, you have to do the work to get the outcomes that you want. Yes, there will be some luck, there will be some favor, there will be different things, but you have to be prepared, and you have to be on course to get the outcomes that you want. You should not be in your mid-30s. Yes, of course, you could be a 60-year-old getting your MD. Yes. And there probably is one person that has done that in life, and they're a brain surgeon at 59 years old, and they did just pass out of med school when they were a grandmother. And I think that part of the issue is that once we have that one thing happen, then you have people saying, well, it's possible. And so don't tell me you trying to kill my dreams, or you trying to, and then we're not dealing with a measured sense of reality.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%.
Plenty things are possible.
Yeah.
But then
But faith without work is.
Yeah, true. But then we also have to measure things in probable, and I also think that's one of the differences between men and women. They say, "Oh, yeah, I could do this. This is possible," and this comes down to the analytics too. Is that men will be like, "Yes, that may be possible, but what is the probability that is going to happen? How and with that probability, am I willing to risk whatever it is I need to risk in order to achieve that goal, even though there may be a minuscule probability in doing so?" I mean, I could play basketball. It's possible for me to get to the NBA. It's probably not going to happen,
Right.
So uh, it it's one of those things, because you also said about the idea of equality. The route that it seems that they were going is saying that we're trying to be equal in value, but it seems like it's transitioning to say that we are equal across the board.
As the same, yeah.
Yeah, I would even argue to say that we are not equal in value.
I would
Well,
argue the
well,
same. Agree with
well,
that.
well. I would say it depends on what you equate as value. If you're talking about the intrinsic human life, no, no, and even then, if it comes down to, hey, two people are dying, you have to save one. Two people drowning, you got to dive down there and save one, and the other person's gonna die. You're now putting a value on that human life, regardless of who it is.
It's more
But
likely
then,
going to be a female.
would it though? Because now, if you know that one is just a random female, or one is the president, or one is a brain surgeon that saves lives every day, or like, does that then change what you do?
But
You
now
know.
you're putting a lot of caveats
Yeah,
around the
that's a loaded
idea of
question.
value.
Mm-hmm.
Because, see, for me, when it is that I start to talk about value, and in the sense of equality, is human value. So, I mean, and my kind of thought process on this may differ from you guys. When I look at value, I think that every human being has infinite value, infinite innate value as a
Mm-hmm.
human. And every coupling, every grouping also has intimate value. And this is like, it goes and it gets some of the concepts. I guess you have to want to be involved in the concepts to get the concepts. But if you're a mathematical person, you know that you can add infinity and infinity and these kinds of things. You add infinity and infinity, but how do you add an infinity if infinity is already everything? And so these this thing, when you're talking about value, I would ever look at a person and in the sense of the human capacity, value one over the other. Now if we have something to do, yes, it is more
Mm-hmm.
valuable for me to take one of my guys out on a fishing trip than to take a woman. That it's more valuable for me to do that.
Right.
But it could be as equally more valuable for me to take my wife on vacation than to go hang with the boys.
Right.
The so it's to me that part of it can shift. But
Mm-hmm.
when you get to the sense of saying, okay, as human beings, we want to, because it does then for me leave the realm of, okay, as a physical human body, what is your value to the human species and our proliferation of continuing on? If you
Mm-hmm.
start talking in that sense, then yeah, you can have points where you say, oh, we only need 100,000 women and 6 million men and whatever. You could get to that point, but for me, it doesn't get there because I am also always going to incorporate the unseen and spiritual in the context of everything we are.
Uh, Agreed. Now, the reason I bring that up, I'm a person who believes in God. I'm a Christian. I believe that every human is infinitely valued to God, right? He has, we are his creation. We have that value to him. But we are in the world. So we have, again, value to one another. And that's why I brought up the analogy of having to save a life, because even though we view each life as sacred, you're going to have to make a choice. Who do you save? Even if it comes down to your own family. If you had to pick between your wife and your child, what do you do? Like, there comes a decision, and in that moment, you are placing more value on one. And for whatever reason it may be, we still are doing that. You're still going to try and save both, but you're going to save one
Mhm.
before the other.
But
Right.
I'll do this. You know, I bring in a bit of a historical context, right?
Okay.
We have had any number of times, and you know, as time goes on, I'll probably be able to bring better examples. But we've had civilizations where, within a community, they stop feeding elderly people. It's like, okay, well, after you 90 years old, we just can't feed you anymore. So these are things, and it's an accepted part of the community, the
Mm-hmm.
tradition, because an older person is not as valuable. Now that person still gets treated with respect. They still get care. You know, their family still looks, but
Mm-hmm.
from a resource standpoint, as a community, because again, you're looking at generations on
Mm-hmm.
generations. So there comes a point in time where you say we need to feed the young because the young is the future. And in those, see, in those civilizations, and this is when, for me, my view of society is more holistic. And I always tell people you can't really have one without the other. People are always trying to get us to think about the community, but they want to push individuality.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have a
Wrong.
person that grows up in a community where they know that the children are the future, and we are going to steer building and growing children to the next generation so that that's our way that we are going to live on, then when that person gets 90 years old, you don't have a person that's saying, oh, I am still a person, I should be able to eat as much as anyone else, I should be able to do, I'm still a human being. You don't have that, because it's already ingrained in that person as they were young and coming up as an adult, because everything in the society stares towards how you're going to live, and that builds that up. So by the time as you're there, yes, people are reverent, but they will literally sit there and watch you wither away because they're no longer taking up resources. And so that goes to your point. Yes, at some point in time, now we're talking male, female, and that's about more about age. But,
Mm-hmm.
you know, I'm very sure that if we look deep within those histories, you will see, okay, there's a situations where, you know, we need to make a choice between this and this, and we have to decide who is more valuable to us moving forward. And I think
I agree with that.
those things have answers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I feel like your value should be proven based on that person. Now, as Dito said earlier, if you have the choice to save your wife or your child, it all depends. For me personally, it depends on the age of the child, how old me and my wife are. You know, you have stipulations because if it's a situation where the child is a newborn and let's say me and my wife are still in our 30s, I'm gonna be completely honest with you, I'm saving my wife. And I say that because the child, yes, is gonna provide and it's gonna grow and it's gonna have value in the future. But for me, my wife, that's my person. That's my one. She has more value to me than someone child that, you know, I don't know yet. Now, if the child was say 10, 12, 15, then that's wife, you gotta go. But I feel like your value, you have to prove
Mm-hmm.
what your value is because even in a sense of equality in terms of feminist and the masculine man, if you are a man and you're not providing, you're not doing what you're supposed to do as a man, you're married to this woman who's providing and she's bringing bread and she's taking care of the kids, she's doing everything, both roles. That woman has more value than you. So there's ever a situation
Definitely.
where one life has to be sacrificed. I'm sorry, my guy, you have to go. So you have to prove your value regardless of the situation. And that's the problem we are in now. We people scream equality, equality, equality. Okay, mom, you work at McDonald's, I'm an engineer. Who's more valuable?
Right. And people will have a problem with that kind of statement. But
Right.
that is when we have to, I think that we have, and I get into a lot of little complicated conversations with the conscious in my crew as it relates to this thing about, I try to call it innate value and the active value. So like from potential energy to
Kinetic.
we have say it again,
Kinetic energy.
kinetic and potential energy. I try to separate, yes, you are as potential energy, it's immense. It is. You could be all what you could be. It is all of that. But the world that we live in deals with, when it's in motion, we deal with the kinetic. And that's when we're having conversations. If I'm mentoring a child, if I'm doing this or that, I'm talking about kinetic energy. Yes, you could be you could have anything within you to be whatever it is what you want to be. But if you're at a third level in math and you are in the 10th grade, I'm not going to realistically talk about the potential that you could be a mathematical genius, which you may very well be somewhere deep within the captives of your mind. But the reality of your kinetic energy is maybe you're a poet or artist. This is what it is and as human beings, when we talk about the dynamics of where the value is. Everyone wants to be a valuable person. And I think that's where that McDonald's worker doesn't want to be spoken down to, because they are thinking on their innate value. They are thinking on their potential value. And it's really the kinetic value of what we're having the true conversations about.
Definitely agreed. And even with, let's say, you're a high valued male, not even high value. Let's say you have a decent career, you make a decent amount of money, decent salary, you're a homeowner, so on and so forth. Everything the average man strives for in life. Let's say there's a female that's at a retail job, it's a dead end retail job, whether it be a fast food joint, whether it be jewelry sales, whatever, right? And for shits and giggles, let's say we get these people together, they want to try and be in a relationship. At the end of the day, even if children aren't involved, if me and this person has to get married and something happens to one of us, the other one needs to be able to take the load. Now, we have a mortgage, we have a car, there's no children involved, we have bills, right? Me, let's use my example. I'm an engineer, so if I'm dating someone in retail, let's use McDonald's again. If for some reason I can't work, or I'm fired, or whatever the reason, I'm sick, is she going to be able to pick up the mantle and do what she has to do and maintain our lifestyle? No. But at the same time, like you said, they don't want to be looked down on, but these are the ugly truths of it. Obviously, you don't want to be stuck with somebody that has no goals, most people. And you could see how things work out for people that get together that have no goals. It's usually toxic.
Yeah, I think you
them and in society.
But you walking down a slippery slope, and I will tell you why. Because in the scenario that you painted, right, the issue that comes about is that in modern times, particularly within Black communities worldwide, in those communities and in urban communities, because at this point, Black has spilled over to urban, so it's mostly urban when you're not talking about country stuff or whatever, right? You get women who are getting more education, advancing in the workplace, and finding themselves in that position. And then it's like a role reversal, right? But the problem comes in because in the scenario that you describe, there's a biological hard drive, there's a biological backup to make that situation work. When there really is none for the reverse. And it goes in. So when you start to talk about, okay, a man that's working in a retail or working in a low level sales job, and a woman who is a VP at a company, she making $250,000, and now what comes from that perspective is, if you just look at it and say, well, what's more valuable? How do you conduct yourself as the more valuable component of that relationship? The problem comes is because the natural biology of the man is not predisposed to be in that situation, because the average man will not have the tools, and I would argue biologically really cannot have the tools to be what that female in retail could be to a relationship?
I agree with some of your points. And like I said earlier, if there's a woman and she's the breadwinner and the guy is, laying by the wayside, not doing what he has to do, then like I said, you need to get rid of that guy, which is understandable. And I do get your point where, the rules are reversed. A lot of women are being educated now and a lot of men falling by the wayside. And that's just the truth of it. But at the same time, when you think of it like that, it's always vice versa with me. I'm not gonna sit there and say that the man should be the breadwinner, or if the man's breadwinner, the woman is falling on the wayside, then it's not gonna work. It's gonna become toxic. It's always gonna be vice versa. Like you said, the woman could be making $250,000 a year. The man may not, and like you said, he might not be able to handle it. But that's just the cold truth. If you can't handle it, then you either need to figure your life out, or you need to move on. It's just that simple. I'm not gonna give the female flack and not give the man flack because it happens in both ways. So,
but when
I
you
agree.
when you to the point there, my point is there is actual value. So even you just draw like a realistic scenario. In the majority of let's take a look at certain demographic of say men presidents of Fortune 500 companies or what's not, they have homemaker wives. They're not, their wives are not also vice presidents of companies. So when you have those scenarios and let's say the wife is a school teacher or the wife and a school teacher by training, not currently working, or they would have went to college and maybe they went to college so they're educated, but they may have worked inside of the husband's law firm from its inception and they've not pursued their own career. That's what happens in the majority of scenarios with super successful men. So you have families where there are those paradigms that are created, and there is realistically no way that, okay, this woman is going to go and earn the $500,000 that this guy is earning, or the $6.2 million that this guy is earning because he's the president of Tyco, or like that's not the way that it works. But within the context of that family unit, there is a value that that woman can bring that is elevated to the point of having a cohesive unit. Now, whether or not in dollars and cents you ever want to say that it's equal, the reality is that in a partnership, I cannot really put a price on my peace of mind. I cannot put a price on the fact that my wife was going to engender my children into the process and the status that I want to instill in them, into the manners, the respect, the way of being, and having that direct and constant. There is not really a dollar value that I could put on that. But in the reverse, when you go back to what you started off with, the point that you made about women being educators and nurturers and all of that, that works in that paradigm. When you switch it and you put the man in that role as what they call like daddy daycare or mom, dad, or whatever, it is not the natural. You don't have the natural capacity to be that. That's not there. So the value cannot be simulated by a man in that position. Even if you can fill into some duties, yes, you could have a house husband and they could cook and they could clean and they could drive around and do that stuff, and that's fine. For me, I don't, that it is what it is. But you're never going to get that ultimate in terms of how the family is developed. You're not going to get that in any mass, in any scale. And that's my thing. That's why I feel that a woman could be more valuable in that role than a man in that role. It's not the same as flipping and flopping for me.
There are anomalies, obviously. So you do have situations where men are stay-at-home fathers, like you say, daddy daycare, and it works out well, right? Because for me, being a stay-at-home parent, it's not only about taking care of the kids; it's about running the household, right? It's about making sure things are done, making sure your finances are up to date. That sort of thing. That's in itself is a full-time job. Like you say, a woman has its value in terms of nurturing and taking care of the household. That's understandable. There are anomalies where you would have a man that could do the exact same thing. Now, it may not be perceived the same from someone outside looking in, but it's definitely possible. The roles can be flipped, even though it's rare. It can be.
Now we back to talking about possibility and probability, though. And
Yeah,
the
yeah.
thing is that by the numbers in mass, that's not what's happening. That's not what's happening.
And even so, in those cases in which they have swapped, yeah, some may be happening now, but how long has it been happening? And is there a record of it happening long term? Is there a record of in some of those situations that has happened until the demise of one of the partners? You know, I mean, we've seen throughout history that a woman in that role, she's been there by her husband until, they crop out. But I don't know that we have any information to say it on the flip side, because it also seems to be a modern thing now that we have
It is.
women going to college and taking on CEO jobs. And question is, realistically, how long is that sustainable?
It is a modern thing, and well, I'm speaking about things happening in our time, right?
Mhm.
It is a modern thing, but like I said, even earlier in the conversation, there are some roles that can be switched, and they can be switched and done well at the same time. Now, obviously, it's not happening for a long enough time where you could have stats to back that up. Like I said, it's an anomaly. You do see it, right?
Mhm.
But it's not enough case for you to say, well, statistically, this is what is happening. Obviously not.
The,
Female always going to be better in the household in terms of nurturing and making sure things done. Agree that 100%. But those roles can be swapped, and it can happen. Like I'll say, it's a possibility. That's what we're arguing at this point.
mhm.
But it's definitely a thing.
the, and this is what I would argue in the success cases of where a male takes on that feminine role. He fully takes on the feminine role, and it tends to be in homosexual relationships that the feminine male takes on that role and is able to fulfill that to the end of their life, because they actually take on the full feminine role. They almost to the point of being a woman.
Yeah, I actually, and I have examples of this in very close quarters in pretty good numbers, actually, just anecdotally, right?
Mm-hmm.
And at different ages and stages of life, I just happen to have it very close to me, right? And I could say like there are definitely instances, if I had to write out a case study, I'd say that where you have a man that remains manly but performs the functions that you talk about in terms of homemaking and caretaking and holding that down, there is an there is definitely a inevitable clash as it relates to leadership and as it relates to direction. It's, and this is like I say, I have a good number of this close to me, and I see that, and I see it in some people that are in my set and a little younger, where you can see the evolution of this individual where the woman is making 3-4 times what the man is making, but the man is very manly, and then you start to see, okay, yeah, he's doing these things. However, there is a time when that female starts to want to impose based on this and that. And because it is a manly man she's dealing with, you end up with conflict. Now, to Dito's point, when you start to talk about, well, if there's an effeminate man that conducts himself a certain way when it comes to leadership and when it comes to, the direction of where things are moving as a unit, then that's different. And then I would start to say, well, where are we actually going as a society once we start to do that? That's new territory.
Definitely. I also have cases like that close to me as well. where the man is also manly, and then the woman decides she wants to make all the decisions. She's bringing in and she's providing. That's understandable. I've seen it happen, and it's still happening today. The thing with that is that, like you say, as a unit, where are we going? Discussions need to be had. You need to sit down. You need to communicate with your partner, right? Certain rules, and any relationship, whether the man's the breadwinner or the woman's the breadwinner, rules need to be set in stone, regardless of what the situation is. So if you were the woman who was bringing in the bread and you agree to certain things, then by all means, you got to take what comes with it, right? You can't bottle it no more because it's already agreed upon. And vice versa. If the man is doing X, Y, and Z, and you agree to be submissive and so on and so forth, then you need to run with it. Right? You need to make it work. But at the same time, you should never switch roles or stay in your assigned roles without having that communication, without setting those things in stone. And I think that's where we go. We have a lot of problems now. Right?
I don't know how solid that stone is, because
that's what I'm saying. We have a lot of problems there now, whereas females, even men and females, agree to certain things in the relationship. But the moment one person says X, Y, and Z, oh, I don't like how she's talking to me.
Exactly.
He say you can't go there.
The point.
Right. And if you say he can't, if you tell her she can't go there, then you can't tell me what to do. Right. So I feel like it needs to be, like I said, once again, set in stone and defined. That needs to be a conversation. And obviously you need to stick to a certain set of rules.
Yeah. You gotta watch that feminine speak there. I feel like.
Well, let me rephrase that. You should set your rules.
Yeah, it's almost like in the job contracts where it's set in stone, and then it says other sundry duties as assigned, which is also in stone. So then it becomes wide open again.
Well,
so
a relationship is a contract regardless, right? There's always going to be loopholes, right? So you can sit there and set the rules all day long. If it's a game you're playing and it's a game of life, it needs to have rules, regardless if you're by yourself or with somebody.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think the majority of time those rules go unspoken, and a part of a conversation that we are engaging in, that I think, and I don't know who to attribute it to the first time I heard it, but it rang with me when it was said that this phase of time that we're going in right now is a renegotiation, and they were talking about marriage, but is a renegotiation of the marriage contract. And I think that if we start to put it in terms when we talk about traditional and whatever we call traditional or whatever, when you have the man as protector, provider, priest, or whatever it is, and then you have the woman as the nurturer, it was pretty much set that is what this is. And whatever capacity, even if there's a woman bringing in some income or have a job or do whatever, it was pretty much set that these are your roles and responsibilities, and these are yours. And it was set at a point in time, and then it just carried on by tradition. And there has never been that realistic look to say, okay, now we are dealing with two different beings. This is actually, over the last 40, 50 years, we have grown a new woman, and we need to sit this woman down, and we need to be having a conversation collectively as to what a relationship looks like. What does a marriage look like with this new woman? And I think that's what is a big societal conversation. That's a big conversation, popular conversation, that all of what's happening with this dynamic with the male, the woman, the manosphere, the feminism, all of this, I think that's where the solution lies in all of this. Right now, we just throwing stuff out and everybody just giving their side and all of that. But I think that the solution really lies in solving that problem there.
Right. The problem is now you have those rules and those laws, a crap ton of subsections, obviously, right? You have a lot of loopholes. Everybody trying to get over one another. It's, to this day and age now, it's not people moving together as a unit. It's all me, independent. How can you have two people together that are both independent but working as a unit? It's a ball hog. It's not a team.
Right. But that's the conversation. And it goes back to what we were talking about in the warm-ups in the pregame. You have to get with like-minded people. If you have a bunch of people, if you have 50 people over there who all on individual tip and everybody dating one another, and you just have 4 who over here talking about togetherness and unity and family and legacy and community, you have to be with the ones on that side. You really can't spend too much time trying to convince the people who have the individual mindset that they need to be thinking collectively.
Agreed, for sure. For sure. Yeah, and then that there lies the issue.
So
Most
what you said just now, Wayne, you said how do we define a relationship with this new woman? So is it the consensus that men have stayed the same and women have not?
Yeah, I actually think that, partially by design, but partially by society in the way that it's constructed, there is a valuation of a it's almost like back to the point of you made about the value of the child and is it a success or not. When you start talk about a unit of a adopted human male, the unit of an adopted human male is more in line with the structure and nature of a man based on the way that society is constructed now, based on capitalism and based on the ideals of personal property, democracy, whatever you want to call it. That is more aligned with a base male. And so the base male is not moving much. However, there's always an ebb and flow. And what it is that I can say that I'm starting to see, because it goes back to nature. And men will, at some point in time, start evolving or devolving, as the case may be, to fit the basic requirements, which by nature is the need to get with a woman. And so if you're now faced with this need to get with a woman, you're going to start to capitulate to the things that are required for you to get with a woman, whether it is good or not. And so now you have men turning into things, but if it's being led by a female, if it's being led by a female ideal, the problem is that we enter into that delusion realm. And then the man gets backdoored into living in delusion. And the society then lives in delusion because you're meeting her where she is. She says that she wants this and that and this and that, and you should be like this, and you should. And so when you start doing that, you will go against your nature as a man to ultimately, and not just as a single man, but over the course of generations and time, men will adapt and start to be manipulating themselves and the others to give the woman what she wants. And so when we start to do that, the problem that we're going to have as a society is, if we don't have that balance, there's this big push of the future is female. Where does that come from? What's the sense in that being a slogan? I'm always mindful of things that have slogans and logos. So where does that come from? And how is it that we're now defining that? Because if that's the case, we're talking about a future full of delusion.
I think that's
powerful.
That's a much deeper conversation.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
It is.
So with that, let's wrap it up. So now,
Yep.
So now, since this is your opinion don't count, now here's the chance to make your opinion count. Anyone take the floor. Final thoughts.
I think we threw a lot of, well, me personally threw a lot of I feels in there, but my opinion is both men and female can accomplish the same thing if they were to switch roles. My opinion is men and women need to sit down and have communications where they identify who is going to portray which role and stick to those set of rules and run with it. That's how I feel about that situation.
Yep. So I will close with this. I do think that there's two sides of the coin for me, and one is that a man is a man, a woman is a woman. I do feel that there are basic things that in the past, the way that human civilization was developed in tandem, in unison with nature. It wasn't developed against nature. And so, along that lines, I think that the development of who we are as men and women should come from the base of what we are inclined to be as natural beings, masculine, feminine. I do think that there will always be outliers and anomalies, but I think to increase the harmony with the universe, to increase the harmony with nature, which I feel brings the alignment with God, I think that that is where we should be building on. And as we build on to that, it moves into the mindset of what people consider more traditional. Even though I like to define that within every conversation, but I know what people mean when they say it. And I think that what it is that we now have to deal with within that context is goes back to that last thing I was saying about the renegotiation of the marriage contract, the renegotiation of the family, and where do the boundaries of this new dynamic stop and start as it relates to togetherness. I think that's the crux of it.
Okay. Uh, my final thoughts. Yes, a man is a man, a woman is a woman. Actually, a man is a male, a woman is a female, because terms got to define them these days. Um, yes, we all have gender roles that we fall into. Uh, some may be negative, some may be positive, but that's just the way the world works. Um, you may pick up, you may fall into some role that may not coincide with your gender. Doesn't mean anything's wrong with you. It's okay. Um, and and in terms of renegotiating the marriage contract, I think before there's even a renegotiation of that, uh, there needs to be a consensus again. If we're going on the society standard, there needs to be a consensus of what is a man, what is a woman, what is a marriage, and what is the purpose of said marriage. Is it spiritual? Is it legal? And then we could have a further definition from there. But now, shot of the week, the detox your mind shot of the week. Since we here with gender identity, gender roles, I'm gonna need you to decide whether you're gonna identify as coffee, as a potato, or as an egg. All three of these things, when put in boiling water, have different effects. Eggs get harder the longer they're in boiling water. Potatoes get softer the longer they're in boiling water. Now, as you notice with these things, the water has changed the subject. But you could also define yourself as coffee. Coffee doesn't, the water don't change the coffee. Coffee changed the water. And with that, we out.
Peace.
Peace.